today we are celebrating, acknowledging, appreciating the life of Lahiri Mahasaya. On the 26th of this month was his Mahasamadhi, and tomorrow, the 30th, is his anniversary of his birthday. And I don't think that we remember as regularly as we should the great debt that we owe Lahiri Mahasaya. We know from Sruteshwar that the yugas, the cycles of time, take mankind as a whole, from Satya Yuga down to Treta Yuga, down to Dwapara Yuga, down to Kali Yuga, and then back up to complete the circle, back up into ascending Dwapara Yuga, Treta, and Satya. And Sruteshwar said that the bottom of Kali Yuga and then the raising, we just came up from Kali Yuga, and there's been an incredible change since the 1600s. The Industrial Revolution, the discovery of electricity, and all the way to advancing the technology just in this last century to, in the last century we went from the horse and buggy to the moon. Incredible changes in the ability of the mind to see beneath the surface of the creation as the eyes see them. In Kali Yuga, the world is solid, it's firm. There are no subtle realities. But in Dwapara Yuga, we begin to realize the energy underneath that which only appears to be solid. So we know that even buildings are not really solid. And these chairs and these bodies are not solid. And underneath, animating everything, is energy. And then even more subtly, in Treta Yuga, people will understand that thought activates energy. Energy manifests in matter. Well, during this dark age of Kali Yuga, the teachings, the understandings of truth that we learn in the Mahabharata, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Ramayana, in the Upanishads, all of these great teachings were brought from high elevated understandings down to the most physical level. And so the rishis began to hide these truths. The rishis began to not offer the higher truths to the masses because they simply couldn't understand it. They were not prepared to receive it. When Jesus Christ taught, just before the bottom of Kali Yuga, in the West we call it the Middle Ages, around 600 AD, I think it was 300 AD, was the bottom. And it was a very dark time. People did brutal things to each other. And if you wanted to perceive higher truths, if you saw it, if you were unique in terms of the larger groups of people, and you recognized that there must be a higher truth somewhere, you had to go seek it. Not in the city, but where the saints could be found, and not many could be found. Traditionally in India, you had to hike up into the mountains of the Himalayas and hope that you got lucky. Hope that you got lucky in finding someone who could initiate you into these higher teachings. And traditionally, in the ashrams of India, you had to spend years of service and basic training before you would be initiated into anything higher. And for many hundreds of years, the technique of Kriya Yoga was not even offered. And we can only assume that it was still offered in those very elevated environments to a handful of disciples. But it was lost to the general population. But with this changing of the yugas, with this shifting from Kali Yuga to Dwapara Yuga, this is why the path of self-realization was sent. And this is the great gift that Jesus Christ and Babaji agreed to send someone to the West. In the beginning of sending someone to the West, who was Yogananda, was the sending of Lahiri Mahasaya into this world at the time in 1826 or 1828. Don't forget. This was the bringing of the path of self-realization, and most importantly, the technique of Kriya Yoga back into general availability. And there was that moment after Lahiri Mahasaya had received initiation from his guru Babaji. And Babaji said, only give it to the most worthy students. And Lahiri Mahasaya had been living as a householder, as an accountant. He knew the everyday plight of the everyday man. He lived in this, in the modern world that was India at that time. And he said, sir, please, soften these restrictions. Let us give this technique to the everyday man. And Babaji said, God has spoken through you. Let all sincere seekers receive Kriya Yoga. That is such an incredible change. That is such an incredible gift. Because Kriya is the key to our salvation in this lifetime. We may or may not use the key as well as we like. This is up to us. But the key itself has been proven through generations since the time of Lahiri Mahasaya that you can achieve self-realization in this lifetime. Lahiri Mahasaya is said to have initiated over 100,000 people into Kriya. And Master, the same. Sir Teshwar didn't have a world mission in that sense. His mission was basically for nurturing Master. He had just a handful of disciples in that Sri Teshwar incarnation. But then you think about it. What happened to those 200,000 disciples? What did they do with Kriya? And if you look on the internet today, Kriya and Mahavadar Babaji it's like a free pass of notoriety. People use these terms to gain name for themselves. And there are people who say that Master changed Kriya and it's not as good as it was. There's all kinds of statements that are made. What I say to them is, works for me. I say, I'm happy. My friends are happy. Rajarsi Janakananda was happy. Sister Gyanamata was happy. Swami Kriyananda was happy. And this is what happens through time. What happens is that people come and represent teachings, but they aren't the master, they aren't the teachings. And we can learn from anybody. We can learn from a tree. You can learn from an ignorant person. You can learn some truth. But you need to recognize that you're learning truth. You're connecting to truth. You're not getting that person. Lahiri Mahasaya was a householder for 33 years before he, quote unquote, remembered, oh yeah, I'm an avatar. I was born free. The masters play in this world in ways that we can't fully fathom. But there was a very important message to us in that the example that he gave. And because of that example, the grace that Babaji recognized through his offering the technique to all sincere seekers is that living in this world doesn't keep you from knowing God unless you let it. Unless you choose to let it. If you keep your mind here at the spiritual eye and your heart open to spirit, no matter what you're doing, whether you're digging a ditch, whether you're an accountant, whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a scientist, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a stay-at-home mom, whether you're unemployed, standing in a food line, God is present. But the key is to understand that there are certain qualities that we have to manifest if we want to be successful in the world, and that those very same qualities will help us to be successful spiritually. That they are not opposed, that they are not against each other. If you want to be successful in life, you must have energy. If you want to be successful spiritually, you must have energy. If you want to be successful in the world, you must have concentration. You must be able to direct that energy with focus. And if you want to be successful spiritually, you must learn to focus your energy with concentration. And then you must have follow through. You have to persevere. You have to be dedicated. You have to not give up. And it's the same in business, in all outward challenges, and it's the same in the spiritual life. And Lahiri Mahasaya exemplified the idea that you could manifest this inner understanding in your outward life, and it was not determined by your social standing. Lahiri Mahasaya, according to Master, he was King Janaka in the past. But in this incarnation, he was an accountant for the government. It was not an exalted position. He was not wealthy. Master's father was more wealthy than Lahiri was. And of course, if you've read Autobiography of a Yogi, you remember the story when Lahiri Mahasaya's wife complained to him that he wasn't bringing enough money in. And then Lahiri Mahasaya dematerialized. And she thought, oh no, something's wrong here. Come back. And then he came back. She recognized that there was a more subtle reality taking place here, and that she should be at peace. They had food, they had shelter. They didn't need more. We might like more sometimes, but we don't necessarily need more. Lahiri Mahasaya came with the message that Kriya Yoga is for all people in all walks of life and from all religious backgrounds. So he gave Kriya at that time. It was unusual. He gave Kriya to people of all castes. He gave Kriya to all people of all religions. Muslims, Hindus, Christians, anyone. Because He brought this message, just like electricity is the same underneath, no matter what country you're in, no matter what appliance you're using. It doesn't matter how you're using it. It's the same principle. It's the same manifestation. And the manifestation of the spiritual life internally, which is most efficiently connected to through Kriya, is the same everywhere, at in any time, in any place, for any person, if they can practice it and they're sincere. Without sincerity, it's just breathing exercise. Without the practice, you can be sincere, but if you don't practice, you can't expect it to have the desired results. And this is the number one reason why people are not successful with their Kriya practice. They don't do it. They simply don't do it. Why don't they do it? Well, this is the important message of Lahiri Mahasaya's life, is that you have to be able to live in the world, but not of the world. You have to recognize that it's essential to dedicate yourself inwardly to God's presence, no matter what you're doing. When I was growing up, it would have been, well, we didn't think about God. The society basically taught that thinking about God was, one, it was completely up to you, but it was completely unnecessary. And most people considered it to be pretty much a waste of time. Because, quote unquote, nobody really knows. Which couldn't be farther from the truth. And throughout history, we have seen examples of the great masters, the saints and avatars, that did things that made it pretty clear that they knew something that the average person didn't know. They did things that went completely against the worldly mind. Lahiri Mahasaya levitated. The worldly mind says that's not possible. Those who were there saw it. And throughout history we have the examples of the people who've been buried. They don't breathe, they don't eat. And even in the West we have people who don't eat. Raising the dead, drinking poison. You know, I mean, the list of what we describe as miracles goes on and on and on. But people, even after we went to the moon, some people still say we didn't go. There's actually a club. I can only hope it's really a joke, of people who the Earth is flat club. The Earth, to them, the Earth is still flat. That it's just a mass hypnotism or something, I don't know, that people actually think that the Earth is round. But people have believed sincerely in things that we now know were completely false. And they have killed in the name of those wrong beliefs many times. So we want to add to our sincerity the recognition that we can't make it up. We don't want to make up, and this is when religion goes wrong, they create a set of beliefs. This is what we believe, and then they write those beliefs in concrete and say, if you don't believe our beliefs, you're going to go to hell forever. The number one thing to believe in is your experience. And this is the essential value of the path of self-realization, is that it's based on experience. And the most powerful way to have that experience is through Kriya Yoga and satsang and service. This is really the totality of the way that we live. So even if you're living, you have a job, you go to a call center or the dentist, wherever you're working, the tendency is to think, Well, God is in the temple. God isn't in the marketplace. But this would be completely incorrect. God is everywhere. And that's why it's important to remember that the way we act at work is part of our discipleship. So it's essential that we be truthful and dharmic in our work. And if we allow the world to pressure us into acting adharmically, then we diminish our connection to truth. And truth is God's presence. So Lahiri Mahasaya, through God speaking through him, gave us all, us average people. If we were higher than average, maybe we would have been, at a young age, we would have walked up the mountain the way Lahiri Mahasaya did and met Babaji, and then just, stayed with him. We don't know our previous incarnations, but we do know that we've been born into a time where we have, as I talked about some time ago, incredible spiritual opportunity. We've been born into a time in which this is available to us. We can and most of us have received this sacred technique. And in the practice of that technique, experiment with inviting the masters to practice with you. Often we would invite Yoganandaji to practice Kriya with us, but invite Lahiri Mahasaya to practice with you. Invite Sri Teshwar to practice with you. Invite Babaji to practice with you. Attune yourself to their vibration and then practice their energy through you. If we dedicate ourselves to the practice of Kriya, we will achieve the most that we can in this lifetime. Will that be liberation? It might. It can. But will it? We don't know for sure. But the more energy we put into our practice, the more we will accomplish. And the more that God can do through this lifetime, through us. And that, as it says in the Gita, no effort is lost. Whatever you do, it will carry you through to the next life. In fact, if you think about it, you must have done something in the previous incarnations to receive the blessing of Kriya in this lifetime so easily. So, it's a great blessing, it's a great act of grace, and it's a sign of the times in which we live. It's one of the great things about the time in which we live is that we have the opportunity to practice Kriya, we have a spiritual family to support each other, and we live in a world that motivates us. I lived on a beach in Hawaii for some years. It wasn't motivating spiritually. I was happy, I would go swimming in the ocean and go surfing. Eventually, though, I realized that in itself was not happiness. And when I became acquainted with Yogananda's teachings, I recognized that I had to do more than live a comfortable life. Not everybody has the opportunity to live a comfortable life. But if your life is challenging, use those challenges to motivate you spiritually, rather than thinking, because of these challenges, I cannot be more spiritual. Those are the very things that give you the power to accomplish more spiritually. If God is giving it to you, it's yours. But the key, since God has given it to you, you have to give it back to God. You say, Lord, you gave me this, but it's your responsibility to help me through it. So, what are we going to do? Not what am I going to do? When you're short on funds, when your health isn't good, when you're not sure what decision to make, don't think, what will I do? think, what will we do? You know, one of the greatest, most terrible delusions in this life is the idea that we think that God is not with us and present and living through us. This is a terrible thing. We have to break that hypnosis. The hypnosis that says that God is only manifest in those other saints. God only comes to people better than us. God is in every soul. God is every soul. God is in every life. God just doesn't manifest as fully through lives that, I mean, what is ignorance? Sin is ignorance. Ignorance is limitation of consciousness. So we have to break away from the hypnosis that God is separate from ourselves, our lives, and the world that we live in. We have to break that hypnosis. So if you're at work and your boss is yelling at you, that's God. Yeah. But you have to remember that God likes a good joke. In the American Indian tradition, some of the Indians call God, one of the names for God is coyote. Because the coyote is a trickster. The coyote is very sneaky. And he just runs around in the dark and does things that you don't expect. And God does this. God does things all the time that we don't expect. But the thing to remember is that it's God that's doing these unexpected things. And so we shouldn't feel separated. The tendency is to separate ourselves from God when something challenging happens or something unexpected happens. There's a story of Yoganandaji when he was being driven somewhere. And they came very close to going off the road. And there was a steep something on the other side. And so Yogananda's response to that moment was, "Closer to thee, my Lord. Closer to thee, my Lord." In those moments, whatever they may be, you know, we've all, if you've driven in India, you've all had that moment when you thought you were just about to have an accident. Where did your mind go? Closer to thee, my Lord? Or, I'm worried about my body or my car. Practice that. Practice when somebody's yelling at you, closer to thee, my Lord. When somebody's situation is challenging you, closer to thee, my Lord. What are we going to do? And the trick is that over time, it'll take a little time, depending on your strength of mind and your inner connection, you will shift from the hypnosis to most of the time feeling that God is with you. Not that you're aware of omnipresent spirit and the whole cosmos, but that sense of that your friend, the divine, is with you and participating. And that sense of closeness is your reality, not distance. We pray to the masters and we think, well, the master's like way out there somewhere. Well, we don't even know where, but it must be far away. No, it's right here. And it can never be further than right here. Because they're one with omnipresent spirit. So let our reactions to the world in which we live be closer to thee, my Lord. And this is the great teaching, one of the great teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, is that the householder path, the yogi who can go into the marketplace and remain closer to thee, my Lord, is the greater yogi than the one who sits in the cave. Now, we might wish we could go sit in the cave, but the fact is, and if you feel inspired to do that, do it. But most of us would go to the cave and we wouldn't be any better off than we are now. We might even be worse off. The energy that it takes to manifest success outwardly gets us going. and teaches us to act as conscious channels. When we act as conscious channels for God, this is what meditation is. Channeling spirit, being connected to spirit. And then when we begin to act as a channel for the divine, the channel is blessed. So, Lord, what are we going to do in the marketplace today? And then we do it together. And then on deeper and deeper and deeper levels through our practice of Kriya. One of Lahiri Mahasaya's disciples, Brinda, the postman. He was a postman. You might remember this story, but when Lahiri Mahasaya offered to give him some of the higher Kriya techniques, he said, no, sir, no more techniques. I'm feeling so connected inwardly, I cannot deliver my mail. I'm having trouble delivering my mail. So, when we begin to recognize through this humble postman that these tools, all the tools that we have, energization, Hamsa, Om, Kriya, are the most powerful techniques for achieving self-realization. We're never going to be in a position to blame our tools, only the way that we use them. So anytime you feel like you're getting a little bit off track, you feel like, I'm not doing as well as I was, always go back to basics. Go back to basics. Energization, Hamsa, Om. Basic number of Kriyas. Devotion. Attunement to the Guru. Always go back to basics. No matter where you are, what's going on, when you're ever unsure, go back to basics. The more we practice our inner conscious connection to spirit, the more we will actually perceive it on deeper and deeper levels. We have to practice being open to it because we have to break that hypnosis of it being the other way around. Regular practice of Kriya is more important than how many Kriyas you do. Don't worry about how many Kriyas you do. Worry about how deep you go in your Kriya. If you did Kriya perfectly, one Kriya would take you into Samadhi. When Master was asked one day to take a photograph, he said, "Oh, wait a moment, let me go into Samadhi." And now he can just turn his mind there. He didn't have to actually do the breath. But the point is that you begin to control your life force to where you can direct it instantly in any direction with complete full potential. And this is what we practice all the way beginning in energization. So give each practice of Kriya, each round of Kriya, full concentration. Quality, then quantity. And then remember that the heart of the spiritual life is in silence. It's in stillness. The open heart, very calm. When the heart is agitated, it's emotion. When it's still, when it's at rest, when it's flowing towards spirit without any agitation, that's devotion. So, in the life of Lahiri Mahasaya, we can all give thanks to him for bringing us Kriya. We can give thanks for him showing us how to live in the world but not of the world. And we don't really have that many details about his everyday life because that wasn't the important message. That wasn't his important role. And so I think for us the life of Lahiri Mahasaya is simple for us. He is the first Kriya yogi in the self-realization line. He is the giver of the grace, the channel through which the grace that we might all receive as sincere devotees. And he was the guru of Srikteshwar, and has we tend to think of history as being linear, but we know from the teachings that time is non-existent. That means that the blessings of Lahiri Mahasaya are ever present. And all we need to do is attune ourselves to that presence, and we will feel them according to our ability to attune. So let us pranam to Sri Sri Lahiri Mahasaya. And namaskar.